Good evening. My name is JPD Oliveira. This is the Wandering Clinician. I'm waiting for my guest, uh, Sean Shahkarami, who is an author. He wrote a book called Resonate that you can find on Amazon. The great thing about Sean is he's a very giving, very generous guy. I'm going to take my glasses off because I see the reflection in. His book is absolutely beautiful. So first, um, I want to talk about the fact this is a podcast to help you guys. If you have any questions, you can always send me a question via the chat, and I will answer it to my best ability. If I don't have the answer, I will go look it up. Um, the whole idea here is for me to be of service. When Sean gets here, I'm going to talk with him, and we'll talk about different topics that have to do with mental health and related to healthcare. I want to take a minute, talk about the devastation that's been taking place in California around Los Angeles, and say that I'm truly saddened by the fires and the trail of devastation that it's created. I feel bad for the people, for the wildlife, for the animals, for anybody who's been impacted, close and far. So I'm sending you my, good positive thoughts, hoping that things will improve. Natural devastation, whether it's a flood or fire or an earthquake, it's always terrible, and it reminds us we're very small on this planet, in this universe. So I am waiting for Sean to show up, and until he shows up, I can talk about anything you guys want me to talk about. I'm going to talk about the first topic I'm going to talk about is the importance of having animals or pets in your home. I have a dog, and I feel that it's good for your mental health. Are the best. If you have a cat, good for you as well. I feel like contact with nature and animals, the animal world is always good for your psyche. I know there are many peoples who live in the world alone or feel isolated, and if you're lucky enough or fortunate enough to be able to get a dog or a cat, do it. If you live someplace where your landlord does not allow you to have Sean is getting here. Hi Sean, good evening.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well. I was just talking about the importance of having dogs and cats in your life, and I was going to say, I'm going to finish on the topic. If you are in a place where your landlord does not allow you to have a dog or cat, you can always talk to a clinician, and you can get a letter to have a support animal. So that's the set. So now I'm going to transition back to Sean. Sean, I was talking about the fact that you wrote a book called Resonate. Do you mind telling me more about it?
Yeah, not at all. Thank you so much, JP. So my book Resonate is a semi-autobiography, but also lays out principles that I learned throughout my 10-year self-development journey on the principles that really helped me find success and find what's called peak performance. There's a growing research of what people call peak performance. Standard definition of it right now is being in a meditative state, actually measurable by brain waves, so alpha brain waves for the most part, where you are actually in what's called the flow or in the zone, and it's basically where you lose track of time and lose track of your ego, and you're just fully conscious. Your consciousness and your awareness are fully engrossed in whatever task that you're performing. And so my book details my 10-year journey of self-development and learning those principles and putting them into practice for my career and my entrepreneurial endeavors.
What has changed in your life from the moment that before you were able to actually engage and be in the flow, so to speak, to now? Before embracing that practice, did you feel like it took you more time to get things done? Was it more difficult? How were you feeling overall? What was your mood, your physical state, your mental state? How were you feeling? And then what changed?
Okay, well, what's very interesting is life and development psychology. It's a journey. And I actually found out being trained on these principles that I was what's called a flow junkie. It is very easy for me to get in a flow state and lose track of time and hyper focus on a given task. I have not been ever diagnosed with anything like ADHD, but it's interesting because I've read some research that people who have ADHD are able to hyper focus. It's a lot of times it's known for the inability to focus, but there's a side of it where you can hyper focus. So I've always kind of wondered that for myself. And what really changed for me was understanding how to come down out of that peak state, because that's very important, because when you're in that state, it takes a toll on your chemicals in your brain: serotonin, adrenaline, cortisol. All those neurochemicals have to be replenished and replaced. And if you're not practicing mindfulness and not doing things in terms of self-care, you can really almost turn yourself into somewhat manic, because you'll have periods of high productivity, high performance, but you'll those neurochemicals will become so depleted that then you'll go into longer periods of depression, anxiety, or not being able to perform.
Well, you know, you said something interesting. You talk about neurotransmitters and hormones and all that. People are not aware that their brain is a real pharmacy. Like it is. And so some people are addicted to you know, depending on how you're raised or what kind of home you've been growing up in. Let's say you grew up in a home where every day you're scared, or every day people are screaming at one another, then you're always in a fight or flight mode type of a setting, and so your brain is going to be pumping all those neurotransmitters, whether it's you know, endorphin or you know, adrenaline and so forth, all those different chemicals that your brain needs to react in case of danger. So now you fast forward a person who's been brought up in an environment like that, and you put them in a regular environment where it's calm, they are going to become extremely anxious because they are not used to being in an environment like that. So a lot of time people end up creating chaos in their life to reconnect with the environment they are used to so they can get their fix of neurotransmitters. So you can become addicted to your own brain chemicals. And that's something people, so the calmer you are, the more stressed you'll be, and the more chaotic the environment will be, the more relaxed you'll be, because you'll be able to get your fix in chemicals. Now, the opposite can also be true. You could be growing up in a home which is like a monastery where nobody speaks, with no sound. And as soon as you go into the world, the noise and the movement of people around you will stress you out. So the way you train your brain, or the way you develop your brain, then you become dependent upon one neurotransmitter over the other. We all have them, but you know, like those people that get on motorcycles and they want to go really fast, or want to climb a mountain and jump out of a plane, and they are like looking for adrenaline. They're always looking for the next fix. Same thing. And what happened is, this is not a pharmacy that does not have a stock that doesn't get ever, you know, sometimes you can go out of business, like you no longer have the same production of neurotransmitters. And so what happens, somebody who's always seeking the next thrill can get to a point where if their brain does not produce those neurotransmitters, and then they get into a state of depression because now they're not getting their fix in their brain. So brain chemistry is fascinating. And I think it's interesting that you're talking about the flow. What's the name of the researcher? Mihail,
Yes,
I can't remember. Chernos. It's got a Polish name.
yes, it's difficult.
I will put it in the you know,
It's like Shishasavy or something.
he's got a weird name, but he's a good
it's not
guy.
name to pronounce, unfortunately. Yeah.
So he's the one who did a lot of research on the state of flow, right? And a
Yes.
lot of these research. I'll write down his name in the chat. I'll look it up and I'll put it in there. I can tell you, I'm totally not prepared to have this conversation, but the point is, this the state of flow is, as you said, so people with ADHD can be hyper focused. And so that happens to me all the time, where people will be talking to me and I'm doing something else, and it's as if I'm not there. I'm like totally checked out. Like I'm doing my own thing and people can talk to me and I'm totally checked out, and they'll tell me something and I'll be like totally quiet and I'll be like, what? What do you want? Like I'm not hearing anything they're saying.
And see, that's what I had to learn as an adult when I had a child and a wife, because you know a little bit about my upbringing. I was trained to produce, to perform by my parents, so I never really had anyone interrupt me when I was doing homework, or working on a task, or working, or whatever the case may be. And so when my wife and my child would come home, especially as an entrepreneur, and it's post COVID or during COVID, I'm working from home, and they want to talk to me, not only was I checked out, it would make me very angry. I'd get very irritable, very frustrated, very fast, because for me it was like, how dare you try to bring me out of my state? And I'm just being completely honest. That
No,
was
but I think it's funny because I can relate somewhat. It's very stressful when you engage in an activity and you want to get it to completion, and people come and talk to you. They are essentially disturbing you, you know, interrupting
yeah,
you.
yes. And so it wasn't their fault. It would just be like I'd been working on something, hyper focused on it for 4 or 5 hours, and you learn different things to help break that up, help keep your neurotransmitters replenished in check. And then the other big thing is where some of that anger came from. I realized was I had been, call it for what it is, in many ways gaslighted, manipulated to hyper focus on tasks that really weren't authentic to me or anything I was passionate about. It was just what I was trained to believe was going to provide my family financial security or job placement, or this is just how the world works. And so I could force myself into those flow states, but it's not sustainable. And so becoming more authentic to who I truly am and learning, like discovering, like, what am I actually passionate about? Who am I at the core? And it's great to be very productive and use the flow state when absolutely necessary. But it's even more freeing to just be authentic and passionate and not feel the need to hyper focus all the time.
Well, in American society, I find that people they love the idea of multitasking. And to me, multitasking is instead of doing one thing well, you do two things poorly.
Well, it's impossible. That's what, like, one of the first things that I took a really expensive class from the Flow Research Collective to learn how to implement flow into my life and then how to coach other people. It was like a year long investment of time and finances, and multitasking is impossible. There's some research that suggests women can to a certain degree, but for men, it has been scientifically proven we cannot multitask. And I can kind of prove it, right? So, like, have you ever heard of a mindfulness activity where you start to focus on something that you're grateful for? Okay. And so, like, if you start focusing on something that you're grateful for, and then you say, okay, what were you angry about? It takes your mind a minute because you cannot focus on anger and gratitude at the same time. You just
You
can't.
can't complain. You can't complain when you're being grateful.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
it's really, but like I think the thing about women multitasking is their frontal cortex crosses over where man does not. But even then, it's the idea of being able to do two things at once. Yeah, you can chew gum and walk down the street, but it doesn't really require any one of it. Walking down, it can be like on autopilot chewing gum, but when it requires you to actually use your brain and to really think things through and have a like do math and at the same time watch television and have a conversation, you're not going to be able to do that very well. You're going to do three things poorly instead of doing one thing well.
And you won't retain anything. You
Yeah,
won't.
but then our society is encouraging people to multi.
Well, I call it the pings, rings, and dings, which gets back to the dopamine and also affects your serotonin, your other neurotransmitters, your fight or flight, your cortisol. So, actually, a friend of mine said, "Dude, it was just this evening, and I turned off my do not disturb because I knew I was running a little bit late for this podcast, and I didn't want to miss anything if you reached out and I was driving. But I almost always have my do not disturb on my because the phone is one of the most distracting devices in the world, if not the most. And the way that they've designed the phones with the colors, like especially like the iPhones with the apps, and they have the colors and it looks great. Like, I don't want to take anything away from the aesthetics and how amazing it looks. And I also don't want to take away from how of amazing of a tool it can be when used the right way. But what has happened is people have kind of opted in to this online virtual reality world mainly through the portal of their cell phone, and it will evolve. You're seeing the eyeglasses and stuff come out, so it won't always be the cell phone. But long story short is they are giving the world, we'll just call it the world, instant access to them at any time.
It's kind
and
of like it's like an
and
electronic leash.
every time you hear a ping, ring, or ding, it's not something that you can consciously control. Your mind shoots off, your brain shoots cortisol, adrenaline, and or in terms of social media, if you've seen like the Social Dilemma, that documentary, when you see the notifications, it'll actually give you a hit of dopamine. So we've been just like our brains, and even I still struggle with it. Even by keeping on do not disturb, like sometimes I have to remind myself to lean into the silence because there's a like earlier this afternoon I found myself a little bit bored, and I was kind of playing around with my wife at first, saying, "Hey, talk to me." You always say that we don't have time to talk, and now it's all quiet, and I'm bored. You're not talking to me, and she's like, "Well, Sean, I got to focus on something." And I had to remind myself, like, yeah, like it's never quiet. Why all of a sudden are you trying to, increase the stimulus? Just lean into the boredom and just be.
Boredom is a wonderful thing, actually. That's how you become creative.
I think it's much needed. I think that is one of the things that is also come up and did come up in flow. Like they trained us some crazy stuff. I don't necessarily even agree with all of it, but one of the things was, hey, if you want to take 2 days, one weekend, and do a whole month's worth of work in one weekend, you can do that. But afterwards, they want you to literally sit and look at a wall for the whole day to replenish your neurotransmitters.
What is the benefit of doing 2 months worth of work in one weekend? What can just you balance out your life and just live your life where you don't have to stare at a blank
Yeah,
wall?
I mean, and that's where I said I didn't necessarily agree with everything that they taught us. These were a lot of people. I took this class when I was working corporate. I was working with a lot of computer programmers. People who slam Red Bull and just pump out code 24/7. And it was a very well known course out in California, so it catered to the tech and computer programming population out there. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm sure some people find some type of benefit in that.
I don't know. I think that sometimes there's greater benefit in just being in the moment and enjoying your life and enjoying simple moments. And I think that a lot of time, what people are really struggling with is the absence of feeling useful or helpful or needed, or you're like in a moment and you're just having a really good day. You're standing on the bench looking at kids playing in the park, and you hear the birds and the wind, and you're just in that moment. And in the US, I feel that a lot of Americans have to be productive. They've been raised with the idea that you must be productive, and if you're not doing something, you're wasting your time. And there are so many different sayings, like the world belongs to people who get up early. What is it? The early bird catches the worm, or something like that. Is you get a burn? You're burning daylight hours. All
Yeah,
those
have you
different expressions. Yeah,
hustle culture? Have you heard that term?
yeah, and yeah, I've heard of the hustle culture. But when I think of hustle, I also think of it rhymes with metal. So when people are meddling, or they are going, it's a mess, or nothing is clean, nothing is organized. I feel like because we tend to want to go through life and be productive, sometimes we miss out on the most important part of life, or we don't do things well. Like, I'd rather somebody takes their time and do a good job than somebody goes fast and then does a really horrible job. And I think that we're losing in quality over quantity. And also the idea of productive. You know how people make themselves list of 15 things they have to do, and then by the end of the day they feel like a failure because they only did 14 instead of 15, or 12 instead of 15. I always say to clients, I say, hey, you know what? I know you got your list. I know you've got things that you want to cross. But at the end of the day, when you're done with your day, look at your list and then get a different piece of paper and write down all the things you did that were not on the list, so you can become aware of what you do with your life. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm a big fan of those types of life audits. What it really gets down to me is the world, and I think the U.S. specifically has become a very vain place. And I don't mean vanity in the sense of what a lot of people mean, six pack abs or looking really good. Now, we do have those people, but vanity in the sense of very ego driven and driven by almost narcissism in a way.
Not almost, by narcissism.
And not the healthy
Yeah,
narcissism.
but it's insecurity. People are
I'm special.
insecure.
I deserve more. I worked really hard, or I went to this school and got this piece of paper, or my name is this, or I hold this office, and what I say goes. I actually had an experience this week. I sit on have been fortunate to have been appointed to the state board of examiners of licensed professional counselors, and I'm trying to do a lot of good work for your industry as a public member. I'm not an LPC. I feel like I know a good amount of psychology, and I'm very educated, and I'm a very caring person, and I listen to what industry professionals have to say. And the immense feedback I get by industry professionals is, we're scared of the board. And that just doesn't make sense to me. That's not what the board is there. You're not supposed to be fearful of the board unless you're doing something, egregiously bad, especially ethically for your license. But otherwise, you should not fear the board. I'm a licensed CPA in the state of Texas. I don't fear the board. I mean, I pay my dues, I do my CPEs, I do what I'm supposed to do. I've never once thought like, oh, I'm scared of the big bad board that's going to come after me. Why do almost every LPC I speak to feel that way. And I don't think it's all the board's fault, but there has been a history there. And, I can't say a lot, but long story short, I made some information that I felt was very, very important public, and have since been through a lot of things that aren't, you know, once they get resolved, I can be more open about it. But it hasn't been a fun experience, let me tell you. And this is just a licensing board and just trying to do the right thing. So the way that it's related is the person that I made some information public is a very ego driven individual. And rather than looking out for the industry as a whole of the state, and rather than looking out for the public of the state of Texas, he was very much just looking out for himself and his own political and business agenda. And I understand we all need to make a living, but when you take on these roles and you're representing a broader industry group, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard, at least in my opinion.
Well, any type of public office attracts people who have egos and who have something to prove. I mean, whether you look at your local county office, to mayor office, to governor office, to state, senate, to Congress, to president. I mean, that's why a lot of people don't have a whole lot of respect for politicians, because some of the politicians, if not all politicians, come across as self-interest. Their interest is more important. I was watching the news a couple of days ago, and with the terrible fires that are taking place in Los Angeles, and I saw the governor of California go from a state of sadness, where he's talking about what's happening in California, to almost elation when he's talking about his plans for smart cities in LA. And one minute he's sounding really, really sad, and then the next minute he's looking like he's crawling out of his skin with excitement because he's going to get to rebuild Los Angeles. And to me, I thought that was really interesting. And so it doesn't send the right message. And I feel like it's also a question of timing, and also a question of priorities. And I understand that there are things happening backstage that we're not aware of, but the way it's communicated to the public, it's done so poorly that it really makes it difficult for people to trust. So, talking about narcissistic behavior, we live in a society that's very individualistically minded, where we are encouraged all the time to be better than the next person. We talk about teamwork, but teamwork is not really super valued. It's about what is your contribution, what marks are you leaving. By the time you die, I remember when I was a teenager and I was in high school in California, there was a time where people used to have license plates, that those license plates that have a little saying on it. So one of them would be like, off to work I go, because I owe, I owe, I owe. Another one which I thought that I saw a lot when I was a teenager was, the one who dies with the most toys win. And I remember going to the house of a friend of mine, and then the father was driving a BMW, somebody who was really into appearances and nice suits, nice house, nice cars, nice wallet, nice watch, nice this, nice that. Everything was nice. And on the license, the the frame of his car, first of all, it had a personalized license plate, like he had something with a bunch of letters and numbers that meant something for him. But around the plate, he had, the one who dies with the most toys. So I looked at him, and I was a teenager at the time, and I looked at him and I'm like, but the one who dies with the most toys dies. Everybody dies. The one who has the most toys and the one who doesn't have the most toys. We all die. Nobody survives this. This is not something we get out of alive. You're alive until you're not, and when you're not, it doesn't matter what you own because none of it is going to be yours. You don't take it with you. So I feel like the thing that's really sad is we're greedy as a mode of survival because America, living in the US, it's a very expensive country and everything's super expensive. And if you've gone grocery shopping anytime in the past week, you know that I'm telling the truth. I mean, the things that matter most are more and more expensive: shelter, food, healthcare, right? And I mean, you can have 5 nice wallets, but you can't eat them for lunch, so it doesn't really matter. So at the end of the day, is survival. So I think a lot of time, people they come off as greedy because they're on a survival mode. I feel like it's the right race, and we're all like wanting to survive. The problem is because everybody is being socially motivated by the social media and the news, people are constantly wanting external validation to make sure that they're on the right track. So we're talking about external validations. I could see how somebody who's deeply insecure would want to be in public office to get that admiration or that validation for people. And some people really need to be famous, but in the US, if you can be famous, you can be infamous. And so some people do terrible things to get attention from people, which that's why we have so many people acting out of craziness, doing terrible things because they want to make a mark in the world. If they cannot make a positive mark, they'll do a bad one. So on that point, and I'm going to let you have the floor again, narcissistic behavior, I think, is really a byproduct of people wanting to be reassured that their contribution to what's going on or that they are important and they are meaningful.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think any overly narcissistic behavior is not sustainably positive for anyone long term. You know, when we look at human needs and we look at the hierarchy of needs, I understand that if you're just trying to survive, what you're really looking for is some type of certainty in shelter and food and income enough to keep you alive. And I can understand where to meet that certain degree of certainty of basic necessities could make someone do bad things or look selfish. When I look at narcissistic behavior, I'm really thinking about it on more of people who have risen above and are self-realizing themselves, and they are either consciously or subconsciously choosing to self-actualize as a very narcissistic, abusive person because they believe their needs are far above and beyond everyone else's needs. Another word for it might be psychopathic behavior.
Well, but that's different though. You could be a psychopath and be narcissistic, but you can be narcissistic without being a psychopath. The two are not mutually exclusive. So somebody who, I disagree in the sense that I don't think most people that are narcissistic are aware they're narcissistic. I think because it's egocentric. So a lot of time, people who are narcissistic, that's, if you, when you're developing as a human being, when you're growing up as a human being, if you are traumatized or if something happens that makes your development be askew from where it should be. So let's say you grew up in a very abusive home or your mother is very abusive, your dad is very abusive. You may develop borderline personality disorder, you may develop narcissistic tendencies or traits or even full-on behaviors. And so that's all you are. It's not a mask. It's not like when you go to the doctor and say, hey, I have a cold, I'm not feeling like myself, and the doctor says, well, take this medication and you'll be like yourself in no time. When you're narcissistic, the personality you develop, this is who you are all the time. You don't turn it on and turn it off. This is your personality. So somebody who is narcissistic might not be aware they're narcissistic. Other people around them might think he's a narcissist. But them, they won't realize they're a narcissist. And for somebody who has any type of personality disorder, to realize they have that personality disorder is hard because they are not aware always of their personality disorder. They become aware of it sometimes through their interaction with others. And so, we might think of narcissistic people as very selfish and unfeeling, but truth be told is that they feel pain when people turn their back on them, when people don't want to have anything to do with them, and they don't understand why. So can you imagine if you go through life and people might think you're a blowhard and they don't like your personality and they avoid you like the plague, and you yourself, you don't realize what you're doing that's causing them to react that way to you. And deep down, you're insecure, but you act in a narcissistic manner. So I don't think that every narcissistic person out there is aware. And then when we talk about psychopathy or sociopathy, the difference between psychopathy and sociopathy, psychopath is born a psychopath, a sociopath becomes a sociopath through socialization, right? But most psychopaths and most sociopaths are narcissistic in their behavior. But not every narcissist is a psychopath or sociopath.
So that makes sense. That I get what you're saying, and I agree with that. I think maybe where I'm trying to get is, and probably more so than anywhere else in the world, is the United States has developed an incentive and reward structure where that type of behavior is rewarded at least financially.
Absolutely. If you go to the zoo, and you see a monkey that's hoarding all the bananas, you call the vet and go, that monkey is not doing well, he's hoarding all the bananas, none of the other monkey can have access to the bananas. If you have a human being who's hoarding all the financial resources, we put him on the cover of Forbes magazine.
Exactly. And the reason I think that's so important, though, is because not only is it a perverse incentive, is would cause a lot of inner conflict, at least for the people who are narcissistic and unaware, right? Because take someone, and this is kind of a good example of how I used to be. Um, when I was very young, was okay. I was taught through society, if I want to be a successful person, I go into these careers, I get these degrees, I work really hard. And I was financially rewarded for that. And there was a time period where I didn't care much about other people outside of myself, and it was about me and it was about Sean. And I just came to the realization that, hey, like, this doesn't bring me happiness. Like, yeah, I might be able to buy some stuff for myself, but I'm not happy. And so I developed and I changed, right? The people with like true narcissistic personality disorder, they may be unaware of it, and it may not be as easy for them to change. And so they're going to have all these rewards, but then all this inner conflict, because like you said, they're going to be wondering, well, why can't I feel love and connection with any other people? And they're going to be very conflicted on the inside. And that's actually sad. That doesn't make me angry. That makes me sad. And that's kind of what we've created as a society.
I think we have a lot to learn from toddlers, because when you go around young children, all they want to do is play and have a good time. And as you age, as you become older and you individualize, sometimes we individualize so much that we are no longer able to connect with other people. And and I say we because at one point or another, we might experience this, but I think you're right. The greatest strength human beings have is the ability to love, and the greatest weakness is the inability to connect or love someone else. So I feel like we're stronger as a society when we love each other. But unfortunately, as of late, because people have been wanting, it's like you divide the people because you create, the way you can control. It's Napoleonian. But you go into a group and you divide them. You say there's only so many things that you want. Like, for example, you've got 10 kids and you've got 9 cookies, right? And you say, maybe meanwhile, you take 2 cookies and put them aside for yourself, so you end up with 7 cookies. And then you turn to the 10 kids and you say, hey, you know what? You're going to have to share those 7 cookies. There's 10 of you, but there's 7 cookies. 3 of you might not have cookies. And so that drives competition. And so what happened is that even though I'm the one who took 2 cookies for the bunch, and I'm leaving the kids with less cookies to share, those kids are going to fight among themselves to get the cookies. Meanwhile, I've got 2 cookies. They've done an experiment in Africa where they went to a group of kids in the village, and they said, put them on the line. They were wanting to measure the competitiveness, and they said the first one to get to the fence gets a bag of candy. They all looked at each other and they all started walking super slow, and they all walked all the way to the fence, and then they got the candy and they shared the candy with each other. And the researcher, who was an ethnographer, said, but why would you do that? And he goes, because we like each other and because we want to share the candy. It's better that we share it than one person has it and everybody else watch, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in the American culture, we've been conditioned a lot of time to be number one. You got to be number one. And so what happens is that if you cannot be number one, what's the point of even trying to be in the race? I might as well not even play because I want to be number one. And if you're number two, you don't matter because you're not number one. And
But
so,
what, and this is where it's going to get probably a little bit spiritual for me. Not religious, but spiritual. What if our consciousness has been ingrained with one because we are all one? And then we don't have to worry about being number one because we are all part of the same consciousness and we are one. And so rather than making this a competition of all need to try to be number one and be number two is somehow bad or whatever. What if we accepted the truth that there is a that that reality is consciousness and that is what we are conscious of, and that consciousness is a part of something greater. It's called an ocean, and we're just all individual drops of the same ocean put into temporary clay pots. And when that clay pot expires, we go back into the ocean of oneness.
so first of all, I'm going to tell you one thing that I'm thinking, a thought that brought to my mind is that when you're a runner and you're in a relay, every part of the relay matters, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say you have a team of 6 people. Each runner matters because you can't win a relay by yourself. But then in American society, there's this idea that number one is better than number two because let's say I show up to a group of people, 20 people, and I say, everybody wants to try this wonderful jam that I've made. And so I give everybody a chance and I want to draw numbers. I give everybody a number and I pull the first number out and it's number 5. So everybody in a sense is going to have a tablespoon of jam so they can try it. The problem is I only have 1 spoon. So the first person who gets pulled gets a clean spoon, but everybody else gets a spoon that's already been in somebody else's mouth. And that's the concept that's being promoted, is the idea that priority, it's the same as when you take a flight and you've got the first class, second class, third class. When you have a class system, you can, and that's where the competitiveness goes. Because if somebody starts measuring their worth based on how other people perceive them, and if they start thinking that they are not going to get the same level of treatment, and they feel, that's when they disconnect from one another. And I think society, especially businesses, they drive on a wedge in people's psyche by saying, if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to be liked, if you want to be popular, if you want to be handsome, if you want to be, you need to have that product, or you need to be in that class of service, or you need to have that. So essentially what you're saying is true. I think we're all interconnected and we all depend on each other. And that's why if you go to a small town in the US, very small town, where everybody needs to rely on one another, people are going to be nicer. And if you go into a big city where you can essentially access everything you need without having to go through your neighbor, and you become more individualized and more anonymous. So, and as a result, mental illness. The
Yes.
more individualized you are, the more disconnected you are, the more likely you're going to be prone to depression or anxiety.
100%. Yeah, we are social creatures meant for community, meant to live in community, meant to depend and rely on one another. I mean, all that's been proven time and time again, and it's actually, I think, just common sense if you just look at the history of humans. It's interesting that you bring up kind of businesses in our economic system again. Is, I don't know if you've done this research. I've done some. It's super interesting. There's actually a TV show, loosely about it, called Mad Men. It started really in the early 1900s. There was some policy in the White House. I think it was under Woodrow Wilson. They'd done some research, and essentially it was, well, if you want to measure GDP and you need people to consume more, then we have to find a way to plant desires in them psychologically to make them feel like they aren't enough unless they have this product. And that's what started advertising. And so prior to that, life, I still think, life in America was competitive. It was still, rugged individualism. I don't want to take anything away from that and try to romanticize it. But there was a turning point when advertising became the number one business investment, and very, very smart people started learning and applying psychology with products and services to make people feel like, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, but if I have this, it makes me enough. And it opened up this endless desire for things. I mean, you can kind of see like my office. I'm big on books, right? And I'm actually going through the reason my office looks the way it does is because I'm getting rid of stuff. I went through my phase of thinking things would make me happy,
Mm-hmm.
and going as minimal as possible, as quickly as possible. And it's a process just because it takes time to get rid of stuff nowadays when you have multiple things that I need to focus on. But long story short is we created a system where, and it gets into social media, where we know what triggers and what stimulus get the result that we need, that advertisers want. And that's a little scary.
You're talking about social engineering,
Yeah.
and you know there are two great forces in people's life, two things that motivate us: fear and pleasure. And we're either motivated by fear or by pleasure. And believe it or not, fear is more powerful than pleasure.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So advertisers will appeal to your sense of pleasure, and sometimes they will appeal to your sense of fear. So, for example, around the holidays, it's the end of the year. You've got, decoration for Hanukkah, Christmas. You've got people celebrating. You're going to parties, and then you have commercials on cars. You're gonna have maybe you're gonna have a man or woman driving in a car in the hills. No traffic. They're the only person on the road. It's snowing, but it's not a blizzard, and it says, "You deserve this. You deserve to have a nice car. You've worked hard all year. Buy this car. Give yourself a treat, and don't pay interest, very low interest, and your first payment is February 1st." Right? Pleasure. 5 months later, they sell you the same car, but instead, you see somebody who's looking at their driveway, and in the driveway, you've got a car that's totally messed up, and then you'll say, "This could have been you, but you bought our car. Our car are ultra safe. You don't get into car accidents. People don't die in our cars. People survive accidents." And it's like, because if you're smart, for example, you buy a Volvo. If you're dumb, you don't buy a Volvo. And so when they appeal to your pleasure, well, you really want to be the cool guy that's driving down in a desert, highway that's, like painted by Norman Rockwell during the holidays. And in May, June, you really want to be the guy who's smart enough to buy a car that if you let your teenage kid drive it, they're not going to die. They're going to survive the car accident. And that's the way you plan the need. And maybe sometimes people will replace objects in their life, not because they're broken or not because they no longer can do what they can do, but because there's a newer, better, more performant, more stylish, more amazing product. And so people feel like, if I want to feel good about myself, I gotta have it. If I don't have it, I'm going to feel sad. And that's why, for example, boats. I'm going to give you an example with boats. They said the happiest day in the life of a boat owner is the first day and the last day that they own it. The first day because it's new, and the last day because they finally don't have to pay taxes on a boat that they probably use 3-4 times during the year, unless they
Yeah.
live in it.
Yeah.
And
No.
so you're basically owning this boat. You'd be better off renting a boat for the day than buying a boat, because the cost you use it for, when you use it, it's more expensive, but then you have a brand new boat, somebody else does the upkeep, and you don't have to pay registration and taxes on it. You pay service tax, but you don't pay the rest. So the point is, but they sell the idea of you must have a boat, you must own a boat to be happy, or you must own a second house, a third house, you must have the more expensive, the newer phone, because just this phone can reach Mars. Just in case you need to talk to somebody from Mars, you need to have that phone. And they put those ideas, those thoughts, in your mind. And then they will have people, celebrities or famous people, come in and endorse products. And I remember when I was 17, 18 years old, Vidal Sassoon came out with a line of hair dryers. And I remember my friend going, "I'm going to buy myself a hair dryer from Vidal Sassoon." And I said, "Well, Vidal Sassoon, is that the guy that cuts hair?" And he goes, "Yeah, like He makes gel and shampoo, and now he's making hair dryer. And I said to him, I'm like, I know that Vidal Sassoon probably is a good hairstylist, but what does he know about developing hair dryers? And my friend looked, I'm like, well, it's Vidal Sassoon. It's great. So the idea that sometime we're going to endorse a product just because a celebrity is using it or because somebody's going to slap their name on it doesn't make it. And that's why we like brands so much, because we want to belong. Even though we want to be individuals, we want to belong. We want to be part of the group, right? So I remember, I can't remember where I was. I had a Tommy Hilfiger shirt. I don't have many shirts with many different logos. I was younger. And I remember going to this place in New York City, and somebody says, "Oh, if you have a Tommy Hilfiger shirt, you're not allowed here." It's like Tommy Hilfiger. It's kind of like it's kind of screamed, what we don't want in this club. So I don't know what Tommy Hilfiger did to these people, but they could not get in the club. So the idea is the same. Or once I was in France and I saw this woman, she had when you get a package from Chanel, they put a ribbon around it and there's the little logo. So she put it around her neck like a choker. And because you had the logo and she wanted to show it off. And I remember looking at her and going, "Can I open the package?" And she's looking at me like, "What are you saying?" And I was on a train and this guy has a suit on and he has the brand on the sleeve. You know how you've got the brand of the suit on, but you're supposed to remove those when you wear the suit, right? But the guy had it on because he wanted everybody to know what kind of suit he had on. So I don't know the guy from a can of paint, but because I'm so shy, I looked at him and it's like, "Hey, I have scissors in my bag. Do you want me to help you take the tag off your suit? Because if you're wearing it, you shouldn't have it on there." He looked at me and goes, "No, no, no, I want to keep it. I want to keep it." There's this idea that if you buy an Armani suit, you want everybody to know it's an Armani suit. Or if you spend 2 months' salary on a stupid item, you want people to know it's that stupid item. There's not even the gratification that it's well made. That's why people want and sometimes invest in a knockoff, stuff that's made to look like a fake Louis Vuitton bag or a fake pair of shoes, whatever, because they want to belong, and they think the only way they can belong is if they emulate the stuff that everybody wants to wear or everybody wants to be in that moment. And social engineering does that. It makes you think that you need something that you absolutely don't need, but in your mind or in the mind of the individual who listens to it, if they want to be part of the in-group, if they want to feel part of the successful people, they must have those items.
Yes. And, I think what's important for people to know, and what I try to put out there, especially with, like, even in some ways with my book, with my coaching, just with talking with people, is I've been in corporate a long time, but actually I learned this from just research and it working on me. So when this is how it all kind of works together. When you are inundated with stimulus, what happens is your brain, it's called decision fatigue. So your brain makes somewhere between 35,000 to 50,000 decisions a day. You're just not aware or conscious of a lot of them. Some of them
But
are
90% of those decisions are the same as the decisions you made the day before and the day before and the day before.
Correct. But it still taxes the brain a small amount for every decision. And so every time there's a new stimulus introduced, and the easiest example is through social media and the cell phone. Ping, 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 right? You have decision fatigue, and what happens is the prefrontal lobe, where your executive decision making part of the brain, it gets fatigued. I'm just going to say, for lack of a better term, it turns off, and the stimulus gets stuck in the brain stem and what's known as like the reptilian part of our brain, which is fight or flight. And it's where we're reactive and not responsive. And it's where we can become impulsive as well. When they're able to keep you in that state, you make impulsive, reactionary decisions. And one of the things that I had worked on was I was making impulsive spending decisions based on Facebook ads. Like, Facebook was really good at knowing exactly what I wanted, when I wanted it, and they would just inundate me with the same ad over and over, and it would follow me throughout all the different websites and stuff until finally I'd buy it. And the reason I bring that up is because what I do now is my solution to the problem was, okay, they can still show me stuff that I might desire. that I might actually use. Open it up, click it into my browser, and I bookmark it. And I tell myself, hey, in 24 or 48 hours later, if I actually want this, I'll remember it and I can come back to it. I can make the purchase and actually make a responsive decision instead of a reactionary one. And ever since I've done that for months, I don't think I've bought one thing off of Facebook yet. But number two is they have profiles on you. They know your internet search history. They listen to keywords and stuff when you use when you talk into your phone. They know you better than you know yourself, at least from a buying and consuming perspective.
I do the same thing. I have a save for later video. The thing about that is I never go back to look at it. And one day I was bored, a little bit bored, and I said, I'm going to go look at that folder. And I had like 300 save video for products. Some of them were no longer on the market because they bombard you with it, and then they may go off, they may stop making them. Some of them would bring me to pages that were defunct. And it's interesting because I used to do that in real life, where I would go to a store, I saw something I liked, I put it on hold, and then if I didn't come back to get it, that means I didn't really want it. So I'm the terrible person who put everything on hold but never come back to get it. But it worked for me because it was a way of delaying getting gratified in the moment.
Yes, yes, it's such a
Because if you don't get what you need in the moment, it can cause you a lot of psychic pain. So I would be putting things that I really wanted aside, and it felt like good because I put it aside because I'm putting it aside for me, but then I forgot about it and never come back. So it's that really worked for me. But you're right. It's they are good at it's beyond. If you really need, let me put it this way: if you really need a product, you don't need advertisement for it because you need it so much. You don't need somebody to sell it to you. Advertisement is great for products you don't absolutely need.
yep.
They create advertising for things sometimes uh, where they say, okay, you're gonna buy soap, but you gotta buy our soap.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, it's not like, hey, you're gonna go get the lowest type of soap you can find. You gotta buy our soap because our soap is organic. It's made by special people in a special place, and so forth. And so they create they create this need around. You're like, no, 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 no. I cannot just have regular soap. I have to have this special soap because I'm special. And that's how they get you, right? And so a lot of time advertisement is not about you buying a product you actually need. It's about you buying a product that you want, which is different.
Very different. And look, I'm not against people buying stuff for what they want. It's just I just want to put out there the it started with being able to perform well, and then the importance of, well, hey, being able to perform well, it's really about authenticity. Yeah, perform well, but perform well on the actions and the tasks and the things in life that you actually love and are passionate and care about, rather than trying to force yourself to perform for something that is based on someone else's dream for you or someone else's vision for you or just for money or status or something alone, which kind of brought us into how a lot of people kind of get stuck in those narcissistic tendencies of just performing for the almighty dollar or power or whatever it is outside of their authentic self. To, well, that's the reward and incentive structure and how we've socially engineered people to consume, to live in this consumerist debt society where if we're not careful, and I'm close now, thankfully, but still digging myself out of it a little bit. If we're not careful, we really are just slaves to the system. And by slaves, I mean debt slaves.
Absolutely. People that are indebted to things, we're owned by the things we want to possess. So instead of owning something, it owns us. And I think that's this idea of greed. We're talking about narcissistic behavior. Instagram, Twitter, well, no, it's no longer called Twitter. It's called X. Facebook, all those different applications. They train people to become self-absorbed, but they are preying on people's need for validation to, you know, because one of the hardest thing we can do as a human being is not care what other people think about us. And so if we can create, it's kind of like when now it's award season, so people are going to be getting awards like the Oscars, for example. And there was one year when Sally Field won an Oscar, and she says it was the second one. I think the first one she got for Norma Ray, and the second one she got for Places in the Heart. And she's like, "Oh no, I know you love me. I know you really, really, really love me." And like, you just got an Oscar. It's like, which is not a small thing. Not everybody gets an Oscar. I'm never gonna get an Oscar. I'm not an actor. I'm not a director. I don't work in that field. And it's nice that you got an Oscar and you're a good actor. But at the end of the day, the most famous person in 1929 right now is not famous anymore, like Rudolph Valentino or Carmen Miranda in the 40s, or every generation has different idols or people they care for, but we don't survive. You know, I'm sure in the 15th century there was somebody that was famous somewhere that I don't know about. You get my point?
I was just gonna say what's crazy about that is if you think about the ones who do survive, I guess you can go the route of infamous, right? Like we all remember who Hitler was, we all remember who Stalin was, but the people who actually survive are people like Jesus and Gandhi and Buddha and like people who actually live out their values are the ones that survive. Now they may not have been rich, they may not have lived in mansions or on Hollywood Boulevard or whatever. But if your goal is to leave a legacy and you look at history, the way that you leave a legacy is actually by doing the right thing.
Well, there are a lot of people who are never, you're not going to remember who they were and you're not remember what they did, but within your DNA, you're carrying some of that legacy. I feel like when people do a past life regression and they try to find out who they were in the past,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like everybody was Cleopatra or Marie Antoinette. Nobody was ever the person who was in charge of cleaning up the pot chambers at Versailles, or the person that was supposed to be the one that clean the manure from the horses, right? They always get to be famous people, which is kind of interesting, I'm sure. But it's like this need of importance, this need to be important, and I think it's all an illusion because we're here for.
But I can tell you, like ancestors and having blood from a famous person doesn't necessarily mean that your life is that much easier. I mean, my bloodline can be. I don't need to go do a regression. I can trace my bloodline back to King Cyrus of Persia, mentioned in the Bible, the one who allowed the Jewish people to go back to Israel. Yeah, that's great and that's awesome, but there's still a lot of, if we want to go down that road, there's still a lot of karmic repercussions from King Cyrus to today that has to be dealt with. And so, this desire of wanting to be famous or being related to someone famous or who I was in a past life and all that stuff, it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's
Well,
not.
it's funny you said that because I spent a lot of money, more money than I should have, trying to get my DNA trace, and I got this service, and they basically let you know people who are famous, who are in the same family tree as you, and that you're related to indirectly or directly. So I got to find out that, for example, I'm related many years ago, like not anytime soon, but to Babe Ruth, who was a baseball player, and Charles Darwin, and George W. Bush, out of all the presidents. And I thought that was interesting because, there's this long list of people that share, at some point we're on the same tree, not on the same branch, but on the same tree. And so we're somewhat related. And I thought that's interesting. I feel like there's one tree that's the humanity tree, and we're all different branches and we're all interconnected. We talk about, I think this is kind of the theme of tonight. Like we're talking about how people want to own things and they want to feel important, but I think humility is something that we should be really cultivating, and the idea that we can find, by recognizing something in someone else, or recognizing or being happy for someone else, that's when we can really get to, I don't know, I get so much happiness from rejoicing in other people's,
Yes.
they get married, they have a child, they do something that makes them feel good, I get so much pleasure. I'm really truly happy for them. It makes me really happy, and I think there's something to be said about rejoicing. It's good for your soul, it's good for your heart. And then envy or desire or greed is really the opposite. It hurts you.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, maybe my last point here is I believe reality is like a mirror. I don't really I understand that we are conscious of things external to us, but if you really think of how our biology is made, we don't really see anything. Our mind interprets light and paints a picture in our mind of what we think we're seeing. And it's only like a very small part of the light spectrum and the sound spectrum. But what we put out, so if you want love, if you want to receive love, you give love, and then you're open to receiving it. If you want gratitude, if you want to feel joy, then you have to cultivate and give joy, delight in other people, as you said, and then you can receive that back. And I know some people may hear that and be like, well, that sounds like a whole bunch of hocus pocus BS. Okay, fine. Well, because of the way that we're socially conditioned, start putting a lot of anger out, because that's probably a little easier for someone who hasn't developed yet. It's probably easier to put anger out than love and gratitude, and see what you get back, because I guarantee you it'll be anger. But as soon as you move away and start putting out a higher frequency, a higher vibration, emotion, or feeling, that's what you're going to internally manifest. And the whole thing of manifestation is, I feel like there's so many people who are just obsessed with wanting to manifest things, and it's not about manifesting things. You're not looking for something. Everything you need is already inside of you. What you're looking for is a feeling. And what you're trying to do is manifest the feeling. You want the feeling of love? Okay, well, how you manifest the feeling of love is by giving. And then the universe will return that back to you. And that's where a lot of people get this spirituality sense, or this manifestation thing wrong. Is, oh, I want to manifest a Mercedes Benz. And it's just like, that's not the universal laws. That's not the essence of reality, to manifest a thing that you don't really need. Because what you're searching for, you might think is a Mercedes Benz, but it's really just a feeling of, it's really what you're looking for is a feeling of significance, or a feeling of value, or a feeling of validation.
I heard a funny joke that reminds me of what you just said. This one lady, she goes to see a priest. She's Catholic. She goes see the priest in her town, and she says, "I want to say a novena." And a novena, I was educated around that. It's a prayer that you say over 9 days. And I want to say a novena to get a Lexus. So the priest looks at her and he goes, "Excuse me, I know what a novena is, but I don't know what a Lexus is." And she goes, "Well, it's a luxury car." And he goes, "No, no, no, no. With all the sadness and misery and gloom and doom and wars and poverty and hunger and disease that the world faces today, I don't feel like it's a good use of a novena. I don't want to say novena for Alexis." So she's disappointed and she decides to go to the bishop. So she goes to the bishop, who is above the priest where she resides, and she has an audience with him. And she says, "I really, really, really want to say novena for Alexis." And he goes, "Excuse me, I know what a Novena is, but I don't know what a Lexus is." So she says it's a luxury brand car, instead of something, oh, with the economy and the inflation and the poverty and people losing their job and the environment and the tsunamis and the fires and the earthquakes and all the misery in the world, I don't feel comfortable saying a novena for Alexis. So she gets really upset. And so she buys herself a plane ticket to go to Rome to get an audience with the Pope. She goes and meets with the Pope. And she's like, "I would like to say a novena for Alexis." And the Pope looks at her and goes, "Excuse me, I know what Alexis is, but can you tell me what a novena is?"
Yeah, it's about right. That's about right. That's about
So, like, if you're going to manifest something for your life, if you're going to want something, maybe you're going to, every emotion has a vibration. So, anger, envy, joy, peace, whatever, they have vibration. And some vibrations are low and some vibrations are high. So the happier you are and the more you feel good emotion, the more you vibrate at a higher energy. And the more you're caught up into the murk of emotions, the lower your vibration is going to be. And so the thing is, being a happy person or smiling or being engaged or being loving and supportive will attract that to you. And then people who are, in low vibration, they're going to get low vibration back. And it's not even a matter of, maybe it's a matter of when and how. So, people who are loving and caring and supportive, nobody's perfect. I have my days where I'm terrible. I have my days where I'm great. I do the best I can on a daily basis, but I'm not going to dwell on it, right? But I think that if you're constantly in a place of negativity, your life becomes really a sad life, because that's all you experience. It's not, you mentioned how we don't see the world. Our brain interprets what it perceives. We don't see the full spectrum. Well, the same goes for if you're nearsighted, if you don't wear glasses, the world is blurry. The day you get glasses, you put glasses on, or you get lasers, then the world becomes clear. The world did not change. What changed is your perception of it. And so the importance here is to adjust the way you look at life, to choose how you want to look at life, the reframing of your thoughts. That's what we do in therapy. Somebody comes in, they might be feeling very negative about something, and we learn to reframe thoughts and how to look at life from a different angle. It's not a miracle. It's just you stopping yourself and going, do I really have to feel this way about this? Or can I look at it from a different angle?
Yep. No, you're exactly right, man. This is why I always enjoy having these discussions with you, JP. This was great. This was great. I can't think of
Thanks, I appreciate
I
it.
can't think of a better way or subject to end on than this.
All right. I wish you a wonderful evening, and thank you very much for giving me your time and your presence. And if you have a few dollars, go buy Resonate on Amazon. You can find it. Sean Shahkarami, Shahkarami, or something like that. And the first name Sean, like John in Irish, Sean. So Resonate. It's really easy book. It's a very small book, but it's a very powerful book.
Thank you, JP. Thank
And
you
of
so
course,
much.
you can buy my book too. It's called A
Yes.
Boy Called JP, and it's on Amazon as well. So I wish you a wonderful evening, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And thank you very much for talking to me today.
Likewise, JP. Hey, and we got to reschedule our dinner.
That works.
I need you and Steve and
And
Gino to
Gino,
come eat a good Persian meal.
I'm looking forward to it. I mean, then I can go around and tell people I'm eating at the table of the descendant of the king.
You can. You can.
All right. Have a good night.
You too, man. Bye.
Bye bye.